Retail sales exceed expectations even as consumers are hit with higher prices. The death of a neobank. And bombshell allegations about President Donald Trump and the January 6 protests. It's Thursday, the 30th of June, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Adam Lang.
Good morning, Michael.
Adam, two things to be excited about. It is the end of the financial year, so plenty of good sales on today. And it's also Thursday, which means that Safe Word by Fear and Greed is out today. It is, of course, our lighter look at the world of business with you and me and Sean Aylmer. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for Safe Word by Fear and Greed. It is a lot of fun. Now, immediately after the show, Adam, you've got an interview coming up with Dee Fitzgerald from Russell Reynolds Associates.
I really enjoyed this one, Michael. It's all about what boards, executives and investors are looking for in terms of environmental, social and governance issues. And it really starts to look at how culture is being viewed by those stakeholders.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. We'll have a bit more of a chat about that later on. But the main story this morning, Adam, is some good news for retailers. May was a strong month. In fact, quite a bit stronger than was expected. It seems that customers are still opening their wallets despite rising prices. Month on month, retail turnover rose 0.9% to $33.2 billion, up 10.4% on the same time the previous year.
Michael, this data includes physical retail and online sales. Expectations were for a month-on-month rise around 0.4%, so 0.9 has surprised on the upside. Amongst that figure, retail spending in department stores rose a huge 5.1%. Eating out was up by 1.8%. Food spending was up by 0.6%, but clothing and soft goods fell by 1.4%.
So overall, it was a pretty good month, Adam. So I want to kind of get a feel for where we're heading because we know there was a pandemic boom in spending on goods rather than services. And it made sense in lockdowns because with COVID restrictions in place, people couldn't do the things that they would normally do. They couldn't eat at restaurants, they couldn't go to the movies, that kind of thing. So they spent on retail to buy the things that they could use instead. And a lot of that retail spending was obviously online. Now with COVID restrictions pretty well gone and politicians adamant that we're not going back into lockdown, can we expect that retail growth to continue?
And that's a great point, Michael. The short answer is no. And the reasons, as we know, also include higher interest rates and inflation. These will reduce the available amount we will have to spend at retail. Alongside that, consumer confidence is at its lowest levels since the GFC, while wages are just starting to show signs of growth. There is some good news. Next week, we get even more data on how this breaks down by state and industry, as well as the quarterly results. That will be fascinating as we drill into that story. And as we know, these are the headline figures that we've got now, and every business will experience a different theme on them. For now, the headline figure of 10.4% year-on-year retail trade growth is a really good one, but how that affects everybody will be different.
And Adam, one of the big themes in retail spending really over the last kind of year to 24 months or so has been buy now, pay later. And there's been some really interesting data from the Australian Finance Industry Association about buy now, pay later spending. The ABC reports that Australians have really taken to services like Afterpay and Zip in a pretty meaningful way, kind of spending $11.9 billion last financial year, which was more than double 3 years earlier.
Yeah, Michael, it seems to have happened quickly and it's more widely used than I thought. And that's possibly because I don't really use it myself. But apparently 38% of those surveyed had used a buy now, pay later product, with the platforms reporting a massive 5.9 million active accounts. Some people apparently have accounts with multiple providers, but still with so many people using it, it's not surprising that the Federal Minister for Financial Services, Stephen Jones, is flagging legislation within a year to regulate the industry. He has reassured providers that there'll be a lot of consultation.
I'm sure they will be happy about that. What they won't be happy about would be their performance on the share market yesterday. The buy now, pay later companies did not have a good day. Block, which owns Afterpay, was down 6.2%. Zip closed 4.2% lower. And Sezzle, which Zip is attempting to buy, was down another 3.7%. Overall, it was actually a pretty ordinary day on the local market as a whole. The S&P ASX 200 closed down 0.9% to 6,700 points, breaking its 4-day run of gains.
That's right, Michael. 4 days up, then one down. The top performer was Liontown Resources, which climbed 5.2% after the lithium group announced a major deal with automotive giant Ford. That is a 5-year deal starting in 2024, which will see Liontown providing lithium for electric vehicle batteries. Commonwealth Bank was down 0.6%, and the other three banks, National Australia Bank, Westpac and ANZ, were all up about 1%. The big iron ore miners all closed down between 0.5% and 1%.
The tech sector, Adam, was down 2.8% after a pretty poor lead-in from Wall Street. And the worst performer on the bourse yesterday was Tyro Payments, which plunged 16.7% after losing its CEO. I have a bit more on that one later on. But on international markets, part of the reason for the ordinary day locally, particularly with those buy now, pay later stocks, was the hit to consumer confidence in the US. Confidence there is at its lowest point in 16 months, which is worse than expected, reflecting a pretty negative outlook for the economy, for the labour market, and for incomes.
Michael, that's right. And really, it comes back to inflation concerns. Bloomberg says consumers in the US are worried about rising fuel and food prices. They're the prices that they see so much of in their everyday living. Sounds familiar, doesn't it, with what we're seeing here?
Sure does.
The Aussie dollar is sitting at around 69 US cents. Oil is around US $111 a barrel. Gold is selling for about US $1,820 an ounce. And Bitcoin is still hovering around the US $20,000 mark. And hasn't that changed a lot in the last year?
Yeah, it sure has. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Now, Adam, we've talked a fair bit about Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's visit to Madrid this week, and it really feels like Australia's taking its place on the world stage. The list of meetings that he's had while at the NATO summit is pretty impressive. Sideline meetings with the leaders of Britain, Italy, Germany, and the European Commission. He's also meeting with the leaders of New Zealand, Japan, South Korea. They're the other non-NATO members invited to attend what is the largest NATO summit ever held. One of the other big developments in the last 24 hours is the announcement of US reinforcements of NATO forces in Europe. US President Joe Biden said that the alliance is needed more today than it ever has been.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's own speech to this very important gathering makes Australia's position pretty clear, telling NATO that, quote, "We recognise there is strategic competition in our region, and Australia is not afraid to stand up with all the countries of our region for an open, inclusive and prosperous Indo-Pacific," end of quote. China is going to be framed as a systemic challenge for NATO, and that is the first time the organisation has considered the threat posed by that nation.
And back home, of course, domestic politics is continuing, and Energy Minister Chris Bowen has ruled out banning future gas and coal projects. In a speech to the National Press Club yesterday, Mr Bowen said that while he'll listen to any good ideas from the crossbench, he won't go against the government's mandate. He also said that Labor's 43% emissions target is not going to be treated as a ceiling. So interesting comments there from the Energy Minister. Away from politics though, Adam, there was a major blow to the neobank movement yesterday. We mentioned this at the top of the show. The news that Volt is going to shut down and hand its license back to the banking regulator. The company will return about $100 million in deposits to customers. Yesterday, Volt was using its website to urge customers to withdraw their funds before July 5, which is when they'll start to close accounts. Interest rates, in the meantime, on all accounts have been set to 0.
That's right, Michael. The landscape for neobanks is changing and funding is the problem here. Volt just has not been able to secure the funding it needs to keep operating. blaming the pandemic and the challenging global economic climate. It's been operating in Australia since 2019, and that was when the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority gave licences to 4 startup banks targeting the retail banking sector. But it's been a tough space to operate in. Rival neobank Zinger shut down in January last year, and another neobank, 86400, was sold to National Australia Bank. ASX-listed Judo Bank is the other one still operating, but its shares have halved in value since its high in November last year.
Yeah, it's tough news, isn't it, for the 140 staff at Volt, and obviously for anyone who was banking there. More than 8,000 customers had opened accounts with Volt. Around 3/4 of those accounts contained funds. The neobank's mortgage portfolio as well, which is around $100 million worth of loans, is being sold. Now, along these same lines, similar lines, Adam, the Nine newspapers have been running an interesting story about the startups that are facing tough times at the moment. Apparently, there's a wave of local startups and also some kind of more established businesses as well, but particularly kind of in that digital space, that are now laying off staff.
That's right, Michael. So we've heard a lot about interest rates going up, inflation being up, consumer confidence being down, and that's playing out in a range of ways among startups. Alcohol retailer Wine Collective, clinical trials platform Health Match, e-commerce business Unibrands, and well-established book marketplace Booktopia have all cut staff in recent days. Investor concerns about inflation and higher interest rates have not helped, and we've seen those pressures causing a sell-off in the broader tech sector overall.
Now, Adam, we mentioned earlier Tyro Payments and the CEO leaving there. Robbie Cook was the CEO of Tyro, and he is heading off to Star Entertainment as the new CEO. He is going to be joining the gaming company at a very interesting time.
Interesting time may be an understatement, but that is absolutely right, Michael. The Star is waiting on the findings of a New South Wales inquiry into whether it's fit to hold a casino licence, so it will be a very tense time at the company, and that is the time when former CEO Matt Beckier resigned during the hearings, which heard allegations the Star misled National Australia Bank and the Bank of China over the illegal use of Chinese debit cards, amongst a raft of other claims, and some of them very colourful. One of Mr Cook's first jobs will be to rebuild the senior management team following a series of resignations. His appointment still has to get regulatory approval, but giving 6 months' notice to Tyro sent shares in the payments group down more than 16.7% yesterday. At the same time, Star Entertainment rose 3.3%.
Adam, Origin Energy, how about this one, has been hit with a record fine of $17 million for failing to look after customers who are suffering hardship. The Australian energy regulator took Origin to the federal court, alleging more than 100,000 breaches over almost 4 years. It's pretty remarkable.
It is, and you can imagine the anguish that each one of these stories has. More than 90,000 customers were affected by these breaches. Hardship policies are in place to protect those who are facing financial difficulties. And apparently, Origin had automated processes in place that went against its own hardship practices, things like increasing payment amounts without considering the customer's ability to pay them. In other cases, new payment plans were automatically established when a previous one had been cancelled for non-payment, again, without considering whether the customer could pay for it.
And a little side note as well, I thought this was interesting, Adam, from the chair of the Australian Energy Regulator, Claire Savage. She warned that automation can be a dangerous substitute for human interaction when it comes to customers experiencing hardship. And that really does make a lot of sense. Sometimes you do just need that human touch to kind of understand what people are going through.
Absolutely. Guard the machines.
Yes, indeed. And just a quick one before we look overseas, Adam. This is pretty incredible, this one. A mystery clock from rural New South Wales has sold at auction for $1.2 million.
It's a great name, isn't it? It's called a mystery clock because their hands appear suspended in space. There's no visible mechanism, so it looks like the hands are moving on their own. Now, that is particularly impressive, especially when you consider it's almost 100 years old, this clock, and it was made by Cartier. It was donated to an environmental institute in New South Wales to help fund the organisation's work, and it sold at auction last week for 4 times its lower estimate, setting a record in the process.
It's a great story, and the pictures are actually worth having a look. They're on the Financial Review website. It is a very, very impressive and very expensive clock. And moving on to overseas news, Adam, there were some extraordinary developments in the US yesterday. Explosive allegations from a former White House staffer at the Congressional Committee investigating last year's attack on the US Capitol. Cassidy Hutchinson was an aide to President Trump's chief of staff, and she testified to the panel that the president had wanted to join his supporters storming the Capitol building on January 6 after giving a speech urging them to fight the election result.
I can barely believe I'm saying this, Michael, but it got a lot worse. Apparently, when Mr. Trump was told he'd be taken back to the White House instead, he said, quote, "I'm the effing president. Take me up to the Capitol now." End of quote. And when a Secret Service agent refused, Trump allegedly tried to grab the steering wheel of the presidential limo and then lunged at his security detail. It is extraordinary.
Yeah, the details are pretty remarkable, and there are more. Ms. Hutchinson also testified that before his speech, the president knew the protesters were armed, with some carrying AR-15 assault rifles, but wanted security staff to stop screening them so that more people could get in and the crowd would look larger.
In this instance, truth is becoming much stranger than fiction. It's explosive stuff, Michael, and it's likely to result in even more people called to testify.
Yeah, indeed. We will be watching this one very closely, as will a lot of the world, I suspect. And Adam, a quick one out of China. We've talked a lot about the zero COVID policy being pursued by the Chinese government. A bit of a surprise then for Beijing to actually reduce quarantine times for inbound travellers.
Yes, Michael, this was a very good surprise. 14 days of hotel quarantine will now be cut in half. Business groups have welcomed the move amid hopes that stricter border controls and zero COVID policy may be eased further. Interestingly, Chinese President Xi Jinping is about to travel to Hong Kong for the 25th anniversary of the city's handover to China, and that will be his first trip outside of China since the pandemic began.
And Adam, I know we are running out of time, but I've got to squeeze this one in because if you thought that $12 for a lettuce was expensive,
and I do.
Yes, I think we all do, but just try paying $425 for a single cherry. This story is out of the Times and I love it. They're no ordinary cherries.
Oh, they better not be.
No, you would hope not. You would hope that these are some spectacular cherries, and apparently they are. This was at a cherry auction in Japan. A box of 15 Juno Heart cherries sold for the equivalent of almost $6,400. Remember, that's just for 15 cherries, $425 each. But it's okay. They're apparently very sweet and very large. But when they say very large for a cherry is still not very big. The diameter is only 3.1 centimeters. So you get about 2 bites for $400.
Now, on this theme, Michael, this remarkable theme, extremely expensive fruit has become something of a trend in corporate Japan, where luxury fruit is part of the summer gift-giving season. Last month, a pair of mangoes sold for $5,300. A pair of melons sold in 2019 for $53,000 at the first auction of the year, and that's similar to the mango and cherry auctions we see here in Australia, just a bit more expensive.
Just a wee bit. All right, now up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview, and today, Adam, you're speaking to Dee Fitzgerald from Russell Reynolds Associates. It's all about ESG issues and culture, really.
Yeah, environmental, social governance and cultural issues and how they can not only exist in a company, but enhance their value and in some cases where they don't.
All right, it's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Thursday, the 30th of June, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And don't forget the new episode of Safe Word by Fear and Greed is out today. You can find that wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.